Hello, attendees of SAS Explore. My name is Dominique Weatherspoon, and I'm so excited to be joining you today. I'm going to be presenting to you some of my favorite features of SAS Visual Analytics for SAS Viya that can help elevate your basic reports to creating more advanced dashboards that function kind of like websites. A little bit about myself. I have been an instructor for SAS for a little over 3.5 years. I teach courses related to the base SAS programming language for SAS Visual Analytics for SAS Viya, and I also contribute to our SAS users YouTube page, so be sure to check that out. We have a lot of great tutorials out there for working with SAS software. To give you an idea of everything that I'm going to cover here, because it is kind of a bit, I'm going to start off telling you about the dashboard that we'll be using as an example for this presentation. I've built a dashboard that is used by an international online learning platform to analyze course evaluations. I'll show you what the dashboard looks like, and I'll also give you some tips for exploring unfamiliar reports. I actually inherited this report and I was responsible for updating it. So I wanted to give you some tips that I've learned along the way after inheriting a report from someone else. Then I'm going to show you some of the ways that SAS Visual Analytics can help you do manipulations on your data. You may already be familiar with creating your own data items, but I'm going to show you how you can create data sources derivative of the data sources that you currently have in your report. For example, you can join tables in SAS Visual Analytics. You can aggregate tables as well. You don't have to go to your data administrator. You can do it all inside the software on your own as a report designer, basically creating views of your data. So I'm happy to show you that, and then we'll talk about mapping data items so that your filters can pass smoothly from one object in one data source to another object using another data source. We'll also talk about parameters. If you're not using parameters in your report, what are you doing? No, I'm just kidding. But parameters are a great way to allow your users to hold a little bit of power over what kind of analysis they're seeing. So I'm going to show you parameters and give you some cases of when they could be used, and I'll show you how I've used them in this report. And then finally, we'll talk about some additional tips for formatting your reports. There are settings inside of each of the objects that can allow you to control the color, the height, the width of an object, and you can save those objects as templates. We'll also talk about containers. If you're not using containers yet, I'll show you why they are such a great object that we can add to our reports. And then we'll also talk about hiding pages and when you use that. So first off, let me tell you about the dashboard. The dashboard, as I've mentioned, was created for comparing course evaluation data from an international online learning platform. So after each class, a student gets the opportunity to leave an evaluation with 1 to 5 stars in a variety of different categories based on either the course and how they liked the design of the course or the learning environment, and then also ratings related to our instructors, like their instructor ability. The data for this dashboard comes originally from 2 tables, the courses table and the instructors table. And you'll see later on why we had to join this data together in order to see all the ratings from the courses and the instructors alongside each other. And the intended use of this dashboard, the stakeholders here are the managers of this company. They needed to be able to look at these evaluations given a variety of criteria, so it needed to be a flexible report. You'll see that I have a lot of different ways in there that you can filter and that users can personalize their visualizations. The report itself has 3 pages on it. You have the overview page, you have a courses page that's dedicated to looking at those ratings broken down by course, and then you have an instructors page, which is looking at those ratings broken down by instructors. Now, the courses page and the instructors page, they're pretty similar in what they're showing and what they allow you to filter by. So for that reason, we're going to focus on the instructors page. Let's go ahead and take a look at the report. So I have the report open here, and this is the overview page. We're going to explore this report as if it's our first time because, I guess it is your first time. So looking at the overview page, we've got a description of what we'll see on the next couple of pages. These images are actually clickable links. And I've also been told here that if I click on the information icon on the next couple of pages, I'll see some instructions for interacting with each page. Shout out to the report designer for including instructions, because not everybody is as fluent in SAS Visual Analytics as you might be. And so it's important that you give people context for how to interact with these really interactive dashboards. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the instructors page. I'm going to go ahead and click here. And this image links me to the instructors page, where in the instructors page, before I show you everything that's on this page, or before we go into detail, let's go ahead and just look at the instructions, because I imagine this is where a viewer is going to start, right? So let's click on the information icon. And when we click on it, a pop-up page appears with 4 different slides telling you how you can interact with the report. So it says that we can use the report level filters at the top. These will affect both the courses page and the the instructors page. These were the type of filters that my stakeholders requested that we could filter all of our data by, and so we have those prompts at the report level. And that's for our region, for the type of class, whether it was a standard class or an academic class taught at like a university. And then we also have a filter for the countries. There are page level filters on this instructors page. We can filter for the group of instructors, their managers, the minimum number of evals, because if we're looking at all these instructors, it's probably not fair to compare an instructor who's gotten 5 evaluations to somebody who's gotten 500 evaluations, right? So we can type in the minimum number of evaluations and have all these filters pass through to the bar chart and list tables below. There's also a button bar here where my users can select a time frame to look at this data over. The request was for year to date, past 12 months, or last year, so 2021. There's also some text input boxes here where you can search for an instructor and highlight ratings given some thresholds inserted by the user. On the next page of these instructions, we're told that the bar chart will filter the list tables, and that we have 2 different list tables, one that shows summary information with the ratings broken down by instructor, and then we'll see a detail page that has 1 row per class for each of our instructors. So seeing what was this class, on January 1st, what ratings did we get for that course? Let's just go ahead and take a look at the report. So I have filtered the data, and I have changed the names of our instructors, but just know that there are over 400 instructors for this company here. So having things like a text input box where you could search for a particular instructor, that's really helpful, right? Having these filters at the top is important so that we're not seeing all of that data and not being able to make sense of it. Right now, we're looking at all of Alexander Hamilton's instructors with a minimum of 1 evaluations, and these are the ratings year to date. We have a bar chart here that is displaying the instructor rating, and whenever we see green highlighting here, that is because a rating is above the threshold defined by this text input box that users get to change. This actually is where we're using one of our parameters. And so we'll talk about parameters later on, and I'll show you how to set them up and how to connect them to display rules or filters or other places. So let's go ahead and interact with this like a manager would. Let's say I am Alexander Hamilton and I'm looking for my instructor, John Lawrence. I can type into the text box here, select John Lawrence. That's going to filter my summary table and my detail table for just John Lawrence information. And if I go to the detail table, I see all of the classes that John Lawrence has taught year to date. And if I'm interested in looking at the detail information, like what did each individual evaluation show, I can double click here. And this was also described in the instructions, but I think I skimmed over it a bit. If I double click on a row, I will see the individual evaluations from each student. So it looks like John Lawrence got a 3 here on January 24th, 2022. Typically, this table would also show any comments that the participant left and also the name of the participant for that class, but for privacy reasons, we don't have that in here. And so this is what our managers can see for this company. I'm going to close out of that, and that is a basic look at this report. Now, from a report building standpoint, I want to talk to you about what you would need to explore about this report to really get an understanding of how you could go about updating it if you needed to. So in the upper right-hand corner, we have a pencil icon, and that takes us into editing mode. And again, hopefully you have some experience with SAS Visual Analytics, and so things like going into editing mode isn't quite new to you. But let's talk about some of the ways that we can explore this report and understand exactly what all has gone into this report. Sometimes you might find that the report designer has left behind a note for you inside of a hidden page. Maybe they've just added a text object there and told you everything that you needed to know about this report. But maybe that's not the case, so you have to go do some exploring on your own. One of the first places that I'd recommend for you to look is in the data pane. In the data pane, you'll see all of the data items that are available to you, along with all of the different data sources that are assigned to this report. There are a couple of things that you want to look for here in the data pane. First off, you can take a look at any of the data sources that you're using, and if you notice that you have any aggregations or joins, which of course we're going to go into more detail with later, then you can see what actually defines that join by going to edit that data join. So using that actions menu is a great benefit to you, and you can see what all has been defined in your data manipulations. We'll get to our joins a little bit later, but that's one thing to consider. Also, you may or may not be looking at a full view of all the data items that are available to you. Some of them may have been hidden by our report designer. And you can see what all data items have been shown or hidden by going to this vertical ellipses actions menu and selecting to show or hide data items. Then you'll get a list of all the data items that are available to you. You'll also want to pay attention to the different icons that are listed here next to your data item names. Some of these icons tell you that this data item was created by the report designer. For example, this icon here on curriculum, you can see that that is a custom category. If I scroll down further, I can see that percent is a calculated item here. Same thing for these aggregated measures of class count and evals total. Because they have a calculator next to them, I know that they were created by the report designer. Now, because I use SAS Visual Analytics quite a bit, I'm pretty familiar with what each one of these icons means, but if you're not familiar with them, you can actually find all of these icons and their definitions in our documentation. So at support.sas.com/documentation, underneath SAS Visual Analytics and working with report data, you can see that each one of these different icons has a different meaning for whether or not that was created by our report designer or if it came in with our data. So a typical category is going to look like this icon here. Usually this comes in from our data source, and then custom categories that were created in the report will have an icon that has a little black bar in it. So again, this is the documentation. Be sure that you're looking at whatever release you actually have installed here. So you have a list of all the different releases to make sure you're looking at the right version of documentation. Documentation is certainly your friend. Now, whenever you do find one of those data items that has that symbol telling you it was created by a report designer, you can always right-click and select to edit that data item to see exactly how it was defined. Also here underneath your actions diagram, you can view some quick summary statistics for all your measures by going to view your measure details. That's another place you might want to explore if you're new to the data for a report. And then also hovering over each data item, you can see exactly where that data item is being used. For example, I've given all of the instructors new names, so you can see here that this data item is a custom category based off of instructor actual, and it's used in a join, it's used in a bar chart, it's used in a list table, and also in aggregation. So explore your data pane if you're new to a report. The next place I tell you to explore would be your actions diagram. The actions diagram tells you how every object is linked together in your report, whether this object filters another or this object has a linked selection and so therefore highlights data in another object. All of this can be found in your actions diagram. One way to get to that is to use the menu for your report and go down to where it says Actions Diagram, and you're going to find this page where you can see all the objects on a given page and how they're linked together. It might take a second to load here because I do have quite a bit going on the instructors page, but we'll take a look at the overview page. So yeah, the instructors page has a lot of connections between different objects. We know that the bar chart filters the list tables. There are a bunch of different filters on there, but a simplified look is going to be found on the overview page where we just have a few objects linking to different pages in the report. So you can see that all the objects inside of the overview page exist inside of a precision container, which we'll talk about later on, one of my favorite objects. And then there is an image of the courses page that's linked to the courses page. Likewise, one for the instructors page. So the actions diagram is a great place to go to understand how your report is actually set up to be interactive. And last but not least, I would advise you to take a look at the outline. The outline can be found on the left pane, and the outline tells you exactly what is on a page as far as containers and objects. And this can also be a place where you can go to move an object from one page to another or inside of a container by just dragging and dropping here. Now, I actually don't want to make any changes there, but just wanted to show you that you can move some things around. And there's, of course, that undo button. I don't think I messed anything up. Okay, that's the outline. I could see exactly what's on each page. So if I went to the instructors page, I'd see that there's a container, a bunch of prompts at the top, and there's another container. So yeah, the outline is a great place to go. In summary, here is a full list of all of those tips of where I recommend you go for inheriting and exploring unfamiliar reports. Exploring the data pane, the actions diagram, and also the report outline to see how everything is set up, how everything is connected and linked together. Moving on, now I want to talk about what we need to consider when we're working with multiple data sources. We can have as many data sources as we like, and we can even derive some data sources from existing data sources. For example, you can join tables together using SAS Visual Analytics. We can define inner joins, left joins, right joins, and full joins. This can easily be done in a point-and-click fashion, and it allows us to do some more manipulation without having to go to our data administrator and saying, hey, can you fix this table, or could you join these tables together for me? You can do that yourself. Okay, and this is going to act kind of like a data view, so it's always going to give you the most up-to-date data, and you don't need to rerun a program or a job to get that. Now, in this example with the course evaluations information, we had to join the two source tables together in order to see, for example, on our instructors page, we want to see, yes, what is the instructor getting for a rating, but also the managers wanted to see, well, what ratings did they get for their course design and overall learning experience and all these other ratings that are stored originally in the courses table. So we can define that join easily in SAS Visual Analytics, and I'm going to show you where you would go to create a join and what my join looks like. And I hope that you take advantage of this. Another way that we can derive data sources from existing ones is by aggregating tables. Aggregating a table is the process of selecting some categories to keep distinct values of, and taking our measures then and aggregating them. For example, I aggregated my tables a couple of different times, and for one example, for the instructors page, I needed to have some data that was 1 row per class, but my original data is coming in as 1 row per evaluation. And so here we have an example of Aaron Burr's class on March 14th, and we wanted to take all these rows for this particular course and turn it into one single row where the ratings are averaged out. Aggregating our tables can be easily done in Visual Analytics. What happens is that duplicates are removed based on whichever categories you choose to include in the aggregated table. And then for the measures you choose to include, those will be summarized according to whatever chosen aggregation you have for them in the data pane of the original data source. This is easily done in Visual Analytics, and it also acts like a view, so no need to rerun a program or a job to get the most up-to-date data. Now, once you have multiple data sources in your report, you'll probably want to consider mapping your data items. This is the process of establishing which data items contain equivalent values across multiple data sources. This allows you to filter using prompts from different data sources. For example, I can have a filter, an object that uses a data item from one of my data sources, and it can still affect an object whose data source is a different data source because I've set up the mapping to say that these values are equivalent. So if I search for an instructor name here, I've stated that instructor name is the equivalent in another table. We'll take a look at this in our report. So I'm going to show you where you can go to join tables, aggregate tables, and also map data items. Back over here at our report, starting with the data join. In my data pane, originally I had the course table and the instructors table. Now, in the course table and the instructors table, those were where all the ratings could be found that were either related to the course or the instructors individually. And I wanted to bring all that data together. So I have this join of those two tables. And by selecting that join, I can go to edit it to see exactly what the join criteria was. Now, if I wanted to start with a new join, I can click new data join, or new data from join, and then I could select my data sources. Or I could select that this would be one of my data sources in a join, so new data from join with this table. Let's go and click edit data join. Here you're going to see what type of join we have selected. You have inner joins, left joins, right joins, and full joins. I need a full join here. And you have your data sources. The data sources here are grayed out because they are set. All the settings use those data sources, and so you can't choose a different one at this point. But if you could go here to choose, and then you could go to your CAS libraries or import a table if you needed to, and if you had permissions to do so. And then you have the join conditions where you have equijoins. So you can't do a non-equijoin or fuzzy matching here, but you can do an equality and you can have multiple join criteria. So I stated that the submission IDs must match, the start date of the class must match, and the name of the participant must match. All three of those, that's a very strong join, and so I know that all the right rows are going to be joined together. And then you can choose which columns to include from each of your tables. So that's a look at the join. Now let's talk about our aggregated tables. Now, aggregating your data can be done in a variety of ways in SAS Visual Analytics. You can aggregate measures by creating new data items called aggregated measures, where you get to decide how exactly will your data be summarized and define a calculation with that summarized data. I actually have quite a few aggregated measures in here, but I also decided to go ahead and aggregate the table, the join, a couple of times, once for the instructors page and twice for the courses page. For the instructors page, I aggregated the data down to 1 row per class for each individual instructor. So if you see that you have an aggregated data set, you could go to edit that aggregated data set. But I'm going to go ahead and show you what the process looks for creating a new aggregation. So let's say if instead of having one row per class, I needed to go down further to one row per instructor. Now, I don't really need to do this by creating a new data source because the summary table, or rather the list table object, when I'm looking at summarized data, that can summarize the data down to one row per instructor if instructor is the only category that I choose there. But let's go ahead and pretend that we want to create a new aggregation from this. So you'd want to select new data from aggregation of, and then whatever table you're currently looking at. What it's going to give us is the screen that I like to call our Red Rover screen, where you get to send over data items from being not chosen to chosen. So you'll want to give it a name of whatever you think would be appropriate. Here, you can choose whatever categories you want the distinct values of. My goal is to go down to one row per instructor, so I'll just select the instructor. And then I would probably want to have their ratings included as well. So I've got the ratings for the design of the class, the class environment. Let's see. Environment rating, there we go. Right, and I would just continue choosing my ratings. And so the measures here are going to be aggregated based on whatever has been selected for them in the data pane. Here we're going to have an average of our design rating and environment rating. And then again, our categories determine what distinct values we have. So that's how you would create an aggregated data set. I'm going to cancel here because I don't need to keep this in this report, but I hope that was helpful for you. Now, once you have multiple data sources in your report, you'll probably want to consider mapping some data sources together. And one of the reasons for this would be, in this report specifically, that these report level filters use data from the join. Okay? But then when I come over to one of the individual pages, like the instructors page, these objects are using data from the aggregated data sets. And so in order for me to be able to filter for a specific region and it affect an object that's using a different data source, I would have to say that in this data source that our list table is getting its data from, there are equivalent values of region. And that is done by mapping your data sources. I'll go over to my data pane and I'll show you how I have the data currently mapped for the aggregated table from the instructors page to the original join data. So here you'd go to your actions menu and you'd select to map your data. And on this screen, you'll get a list of the different data sources that you have in this report, and you can enable the data mapping if it's not already enabled. Then once it is enabled, you would have a selection of different data items from your source table to your target table. Here it's that join of the course and the instructors table. And I'd state that these values are equivalent. So the start dates, these are equivalent columns. Instructor actual, that actually contains the instructor's real names, these contain equivalent values. For example, region in one table is equal to the region values in another table. And so therefore I can pass filters from these two data items because I've mapped them together. So I'm going to click OK here because, or rather cancel, I didn't make any changes, but that's where you would go to map your data items. Now, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about mapping your data items, we do have a great video on our SAS Users YouTube page by Alexandria McCall. She goes into more detail about working with multiple data sources, two completely different data sources, but saying that certain values in each data sources are the same. For example, zip codes in one table are the same as zip codes in another, or country codes in one table are the same as another. Anyways, check out that video. It's a great explanation of mapping data items. Moving forward, now let's talk about parameters and how you can benefit from using parameters in your reports if you're not already using them. Parameters allow our viewers some input, our report viewers, that is. You might find yourself wanting to use parameters when your stakeholders come to you with a variety of different requests. Maybe one stakeholder wants you to highlight your ratings above 4.9. And then maybe a different stakeholder thinks that 4.8 would be a better threshold. Well, we can allow the user to determine that value by giving them the parameter and the ability to input that value themselves. Another place that we've used parameters in this report is in the date filter. Our users wanted a variety of different options for filtering dates, but we pretty much settled on you'd either be looking at the evaluations year to date for the past 12 months rolling or for the previous year. So we're going to talk about how a parameter was used in that case. But a parameter was also used in this report for our filtering by a minimum number of X evaluations. So there was a text input box in our prompt area that allowed users to input this minimum number. So parameters are great because they allow us to give the users some power. They allow flexibility in our report. If you are a SAS programmer, hey, shout out to you. You probably have worked with SAS macro variables before. So parameters are pretty similar to macro variables in that they store a value for you that can be used in different places. It's a special type of data item where it stores a value that the user inputs, and you can use this across the other data sources. They're not restricted to one data source or another. It's a really special kind of data item. The designer of the report creates the parameter for you, and then the user gets to populate it, and then it'll be used somewhere else inside the report. In general, we think about the process of using parameters in 3 steps. As the report designer, you need to create the parameter. You need to define it as whether it will hold a category item, like a character string, or whether it'll hold a number and be numeric, or whether it'll hold date, time, data values, or maybe your parameter holds a list of values. Whatever that is, you need to first create the parameter, and then you need to insert a control object from your objects pane that allows the user to input the parameter value. So that could be a button bar where the user gets to select a button. It could be a text input box where the user gets to type in a value. It could be a drop-down list. There's a lot of options for control objects where you can assign parameters. And then finally, the parameter's value is actually used in either a calculated data item, a filtering expression, a display rule expression, a ranking. You can also use parameter values in text objects. There's a lot of places to use them. So I'm going to give you an example of when we used a parameter in this report, starting with a numeric parameter, and then we'll talk about a character parameter that was used. One of the numeric parameters was the high ratings threshold. So we wanted to highlight all of the ratings in green that that contain a value greater than 4.9 or 4.8 or whatever the user wants to input. So first things first, you have to create the parameter itself. And this is done inside the data's pane, and this is where you get to assign a type to your parameter. So numeric, character, date, time, etc. Then you'll give a minimum value, a maximum value. You can give a format as well, and maybe even a current value. You've got to create the parameter first. Then you have to give the user a way to populate it. So I added a text input object to my report. And in the data roles for that text input object, I selected that parameter I had just created. Now the user has a way of populating that parameter, but it's not actually being used yet. So then we have to go and assign that parameter to be used in either a calculation, a filter, a rank, or some other place where I might use my parameter. So here I'm using it in a display rule, where I've selected that the value for which we're highlighting our ratings greater than or equal to is going to be the value of that parameter, whatever the user selects, and then we'll highlight green. That's one example of a parameter that's been used in this report. Another example was for the year to date, the past 12 months or 2021 button bar. Take a look at what I'm referring to. Here in my report, I have a button bar where users get to select a value for how they want to filter the data as far as the timing goes. I figured that a button bar would probably be the easiest option for my users. And so I knew that on a button bar, I would need to have some values that they could select from. So I would want those to be character values, like year to date, past 12 months, or 2021. So I create the parameter that is a character type, and I added that to my data pane. Then I have to give a user some way to populate it. Now, of course, I knew I wanted to use a button bar, but a button bar is going to require a category role. For the category role, if I wanted the users to be able to select from these three values, I needed to have those three values in a column in one of my data sources. I actually just ended up creating a new data source that's in an Excel spreadsheet that I just quickly imported, and it only stored one column and three values in it. And so I used that date range column as the category for this button bar. Then in the parameter role, I stated that whatever value is selected on that button bar would now be the value for the instructor's date filter selection parameter. So that's how the user will get to populate it, is by clicking on one of these buttons, and that's how it's set up. Now, I need to apply that parameter. The parameter is actually applied in a filtered expression, which is a little complex, so we're going to take a look at it inside of the report itself. Now again, the process for using parameters is to first create the parameter, then to populate the parameter, and then lastly to apply the parameter. So let's take a look specifically at this parameter here that's being used to highlight the ratings above or this value. There's also a parameter being used to highlight ratings below another value. But let's just focus on the high ratings parameter. Parameters can be found in the data pane. This is where you can go to view the ones that already exist for your report, and also this is where you can go to create new parameters. So I'm going to focus on this high ratings parameter. Now to create a parameter, I would go to select new data item, I'd select parameter, and this is the window where you get to give that parameter a name, select a type for it of these four, and then give some settings to it. For the high ratings parameter for the instructors page, I can right click and select edit to see how it is defined. I see the name, it is numeric. Users get to input a value of somewhere between 0 to 5, and the current value is 4.9. So that's how you would go to create your parameter, is new data item and parameter. Then you have to give the user some way to populate it. In your objects pane, if you go down to the controls group, you'll see a variety of different objects that can help you allow your user to input a value. Here I've used the text input object to allow users to input by just typing in what value they'd like to see for the high ratings threshold. As I mentioned in the slides, the roles are defined as follows. All I need here is the parameters role. Then my user gets to select whatever their high threshold is. Let's lower it a bit to see more ratings being highlighted. I'll lower it to 7.5. Now the parameter is actually being used inside of the display rules for the bar chart and for the summary and also the details list table. So if I click on one of these objects, let's go with the summary table, and I look at the rules section, the rules pane, then this is where I'm going to see how all the display rules are defined. So for example, on our instructor ratings column, I'm highlighting all of the instructor ratings that are above or equal to that threshold. So we created the parameter, then we allow the user to populate it, and then we apply the parameter inside of a display rule here. Now let's talk about the parameter that's being used for our button bar here. So again, I wanted my users to be able to easily just click a button for their analysis, and in order to get this button, we needed to have a category role for the button bar. And so I needed to create just a small table, and I did this in Excel, that would contain the values I wanted to appear on my buttons. 2021, past 12 months, and year to date. I added that data source to my report, and I allowed that date range data item to be the category role. Now backing it up, that's how the user gets to populate the value, but creating the parameter was done again by selecting a new data item here, creating a parameter, and I'll just right click and edit to show you how it's defined. It's defined as character, and the current value is just the current button that's selected. Now what gets a little bit more complex is how this parameter is actually being applied. It's applied in an advanced filter. So I'm going to take the summary list table, for example, and show you what the filter looks like. Going over to our filters pane, if I wanted to create a new filter, I could create a basic filter based off of one of my existing data items, or I could go at the top and create an advanced filter. Now the date filter that you see here is already an advanced filter, so I'm just going to advanced edit it. I'm not actually going to make any changes, but I want to show you what this expression looks like because hopefully you might find it helpful in your work. Now when you're adding an advanced filter, this gives you a visual workspace and also a text workspace that you can use. In the visual workspace, you can use a combination of your operators, your data items, and your parameters to come up with the specific filter that you need. Here, I've selected that I only want to see those rows where if the date filter selection is set, because they do have the option of not selecting any button on there, and that way they get all the data. So if it is set, then I check for whether it's set to past 12 months, year to date, or the last case here would be 2021. Now, if the parameter is not set, I just want all the rows where start date is not missing. We have a lot of if, return, else logic being used here, and you can find that underneath your operators pane. And then I've got some expressions here where we're getting all those rows where the date is between and including some endpoints according to whatever the user has selected for their value. So this is a very advanced expression for a filter. And if you needed to use this filter on multiple objects, you can go here where it says text, and you can always just copy and paste this into the advanced edit page of another object's filter. So I've used that a lot. I would just come here and I would copy this and I'd paste it to another object, and that's an easy way to transfer filters if they're not common filters. So that is one way that this report uses parameters. For more information on parameters, I highly recommend this book by Nicole Ball. It is called Interactive Reports in SAS Visual Analytics. You can find it at sas.com/books, and it's a great resource and has a lot of examples of ways to use parameters in your reports. So do check that out if you want to go a bit further. Now lastly, let's talk about formatting our reports. We have a lot of options for formatting our reports. For example, we could choose a theme for our report among available themes that include different color palettes, font types, etc. However, you can also go in and format individual objects in the options pane for your objects. This is where you can go to precisely set heights, widths, colors, and fonts. And if you find some settings that you really like and you want to use those in the future, you can actually save your formatted objects to your objects pane to reuse in the same report or in different reports. Also, containers are a great tool. If you haven't used them before, you can find a variety of different containers in your objects pane. Containers contain other objects, so you place other objects inside of them. We have a precision container, a prompt container where you'd put those control objects inside of it, a scrolling container to allow your users more length in your report. You have a stacking container to optimize the space of your report and just stack objects on top of each other. And then there's a standard container as well. Containers allow you to optimize your space, and you can also save containers with their objects inside of them to your objects pane to reuse those containers as kind of like a template and help you format future reports. I'm a huge fan of the precision container and the stacking container, so I'm going to show you some examples of where those have been used in this report. And lastly, let's talk about hidden pages. Hidden pages are a great tool to use in your reports. They're awesome for showing more detail or linking instructions to viewers, or even concealing notes for fellow report designers. When we first take a look at our report, it appears that there are only 3 pages in it: the overview page, the courses page, and the instructors page. But if we go into editing mode, what we'll actually see is that several of the pages have been hidden. And you can kind of tell with this really light shading of the background of the tab that's kind of diagonal lines going down it. That shows us it's a hidden page. And hidden pages can just be hidden, or they can be hidden and be linked to as a pop-up page. So in this last demonstration, I'm going to show you some of those object settings, the containers, and our hidden pages. Let's start with our object settings. I've made some changes to this list table, for example. I've chosen what kind of background I want. I've chosen how I want the column headings to appear. So let's say I wanted to use list tables that used this format. In my options pane, while I have that list table selected, this is where I can go to set settings related to this object's look. I can add some style to the background, some border and padding. I can change the way my headings look. I can change whether or not my background color is alternating. So there's a lot of great settings that you have here to help you out as you are formatting your objects. And once I get an object that I really like, if I wanted to save it, I can easily click on the object menu for that list table or whatever bar chart or prompt you're using. And I can select to save this to my objects pane. Then I can choose whether or not to save it with the data or without the data. I'm going to click Remove Data Items here, and I'm just going to show you where that is. It's been added here as List Table 1. So let's go and add a new page to this report. And I'll show you that I can just drag that list table now from my objects pane and drop it into my canvas and have all the settings that I had set previously. Now I need to add some data to this, but you can see that it's got the alternating colors and it's going to have all of those settings that I've selected here in the options pane. So once you have a look and feel that you like, do utilize that option to save objects to your objects pane. The same can be done for containers. So container objects can be found in your objects pane underneath the containers group. So if I look at the containers group, I see the precision container, the prompt container, scrolling, stacking, and standard. On my instructors page, for example, I have a precision container that's being used for all of the objects that are not page level prompts. I can see this in my outline as well. So I have an instructor's precision container is what it's called here, what it's been named as by me, the report designer. And then within that, I have one stacking container that stacked the summary table and the detail table over each other. The stacking container is a great tool. I often get asked the question in my classes of, well, what if one stakeholder wants one object and another wants a different one or a different view? Well, there are viewer customization levels, and you can allow the viewer the control to change the object type, or you can just include both of them and stack them on top of each other. That way you're not taking up too much space. So this is a stacking container, and it has 2 objects inside of it, the summary table and the detail table. And I've chosen that I want it to look like buttons that they can select from, but you could also have dots here, links, tabs, or numbers. The stacking container is a great option. And then around that, all of that's inside of a precision container, so I could precisely place each object exactly where I want them to be without limitations of the dropping zones that we automatically get from SAS Visual Analytics. And then once I have a format that I like, I can select the menu for this stacking or for this precision container, and I can also save this to my objects pane. Let's save it, and let's go ahead and include some data items with it. And I'm just going to add it to a new page and show you how I can use that as a template for future reports or even for the same report. So this was saved as container number 3, and I can just find that in my objects pane with containers or objects with data. So I'm just going to add in an extra page here again. I'll go to my objects pane and I'll just drag and drop that container that I've saved, and it'll be used as somewhat of a template. We'll see that all of those objects that were inside of that instructors page are going to be added here as well. So I have my stacking container, I have my text input boxes, and everything is coming in the same format that I saved it in. So saving containers, it's kind of like saving a template for your report. Very, very, very useful. Last but not least, let's talk about hiding our pages. So for a new page, I can go to the options for that page and select whether or not to hide it. Well, really, I can do this for any page. I can select to hide it. And one of the hidden pages is we have the comments. This page is hidden from the viewer initially, and then it's linked to from the rows of the list tables in the instructors pages and also in the courses pages. We can see what the individual evaluations were for each course. So when we have a hidden page, if that page is meant to be linked to as a pop-up page, you would want to go over to the options for that page. Check the box that says hide and link to page as pop-up window, and then you can set the window width and the window height to pop up at a maximum of 75% each way. The user can then make the screen larger if they like, but this is one example of a hidden page that we link to as a pop-up page. On my instructors page, I can click on my summary table and see from the actions diagram underneath page links that this list table has been linked to that comments page. Now, because the comments page uses data that has been mapped to the data from this summary table, there will be a filtering action. That's the reason why if I double click on John Lawrence, I'm going to see just all the comments from John Lawrence. So that is the benefit of a hidden page. Now, I hope you find this helpful. I hope that you found some techniques that maybe you weren't quite using just yet and you might find interesting, and you might now consider to use them in the future. It's always my pleasure of showing visual analytics because to me it is the perfect mix of art, science, and ease together. You don't have to be a programmer to use SAS Visual Analytics. You could be a beginner analyst if you needed to. And if you aren't sure where to start with visual analytics, be sure to take one of our courses at sas.com/training, or even check out some of the videos that we have available on YouTube and in our video library. And thank you again for attending this session on SAS Visual Analytics. SAS has partnered with G2, a peer-to-peer software review site, to collect reviews from our most valued customers like you. If you have any feedback on your experience using SAS Visual Analytics, we'd love for you to share it on G2. The review process only takes a couple of minutes and it does not require any personal or company information to be displayed publicly. So as a thank you for your time, you could receive either an Amazon gift card or a donation would be made on your behalf to Girls Who Code, which is a nonprofit organization to support and increase the number of women in computer science. So take a moment, scan the appropriate QR code or use the link below for either receiving an Amazon gift card or donating to Girls Who Code. Again, it's been my pleasure to join you for SAS Explorer, and I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions that we have for you.